Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 327 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Ortiz. I'm one of your hosts. And with me I have Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everybody.
And well, before we start, I'm going to just give you our URL because I always forget to give all our contact details at the end. So virtualnotdistant.com is where you can find the show notes to this. So all the links, everything, etc. and what we do as a company. If you're new to the show, the What's Going On episodes are episodes where Maya and I will basically have fun looking at what's been going on in the world of work, mainly remote work, etc. And sometimes, well, these episodes have a lot of content in them. We missed the April episode for schedule stuff. And so, well, this one, it's not too packed. It's okay. But we
always say that.
Yes, we do. But it is special. So let me just tell you what we've got for today. We're going to be looking at some of the news that have made the headlines around companies asking people to go back to the office, mandates. We are also looking at the challenge of hiring globally. There's a nice couple of articles that have come up about this, including some stuff about digital nomads. So that will give us a view, like a broader view of what's going on. We have some stuff to say about a couple of conferences that we're both involved with. And what's special about this going on is that we'll have the organizers of one of those conferences just tell us a little bit about it. So you'll hear two other voices in today's episode. We've then got a little bit on the tech, and then we have a message from one of our dear listeners. So I actually thought, Maya, just to kick off the episode, to set the tone, because I thought we could read, I'll read a little paragraph from an article we'll talk about later by Dion Hinchcliffe, who's a digital employee experience. And in the article has a list of tools and his reflections on tools for hybrid work. And right at the end of the article, he says, the reality is that we are still learning what organizations really need when it comes to hybrid work. 2023 is a year of mass experimentation for how organizations will try to better enable hybrid work, not just with technology, but with process and education as well. It's such a great intro to the whole episode, and in particular to our first point.
Yes. I mean, I know we're going to talk about this article, but no spoilers. It's long and it's complicated, and it really just underpins how difficult it is to do hybrid well. You know, how many different tools and approaches and procedures you need to make that transition. It's obviously so much more complex than being remote first.
Yeah, and some of it is being really painful. So let's start with our first news item of the day. And I have to thank Tammy Bieland, because she's the first person I saw the article from. And then I looked for an article that we could actually share with listeners. And this is a note from Reuters. Is that how you say it? How do you say the name of the agency, Maya?
Reuters.
And it's about JP Morgan asking its managing directors back to the office for 5 days a week. And there was a memo about this. JP Morgan asks senior bankers to return to office for 5 days a week. Memo. And this is from April 12, 2023. I'll read it out. I'm sure I'm not violating any copyright laws if I just read what it says.
On the press wires.
So JP Morgan Chase & Co. asked its managing directors to work from the office for 5 days a week, the largest US bank said in a memo. Speech marks. Our leaders play a critical role in enforcing our culture and running our businesses. They have to be visible on the floor, they must meet with clients, they need to teach and advise, and they should always be accessible for immediate feedback and impromptu meetings. I'll stop for now. But just to say that this, of course, has caused such a such a wave of anger in the remote advocate community because of the mandating aspect of it.
Yes. And also just the kind of the mismatch of understanding that none of those reasons require physical presence, visibility, meeting with clients, being able to teach, being able to be immediately accessible, feedback and meetings. None of those need you to be in the same place. It's like the reasons they're giving don't quite join up, or they show that there's still a gap in understanding that there are other ways of doing these things.
And I think one of the issues is, and I'm sure we've mentioned this before on the podcast, and we're not the only ones saying this, is that the people who are making some of these decisions have not had to experience remote work as we know it. So because of the nature of their jobs, the kind of activities that they do during the day, how they build their networks, hasn't really changed. It just transferred to online meetings for a while. And also because at the beginning, especially, all of this remote work thing looked like it was going to be a temporary thing. And I don't think anyone expected so many employees to want some kind of remote arrangement.
Yeah, maybe particularly in banking, maybe. I think this is a huge cultural dissonance now that, of course, bankers should be back in the office where we can see them. And it must seem so obvious to directors who've done it like that for decades.
And they haven't had the opportunity to see how any of this work. And nobody has, because we're still, like we've said so many times, we're still in transition and everyone's experimenting. So that's one of the issues. What worries me most about this is, I'll just read another quote. There are a number of employees who aren't meeting their in-office attendance expectations, and that must change, the bank said. Managers may include attendance as part of performance reviews and could take corrective action if requirements were not being met. And I'm thinking there was a point when we started talking about hybrid, it was all about location. Is it, are we going to be in the office? And then we started to think, or it looked like the collective conscious started to think, well, this is not as much now about where we're working from, but how we're going to be working. And we thought, okay, we're moving forwards. And suddenly it's like the conversation has gone completely back again about the important thing is where we are.
Yes, attendance. I mean, that sounds like a primary school. Yeah. Oh dear. Well, they are their business. I guess if that's how they measure what people are bringing to it, it seems to me like not a very useful measure of people's contribution and performance. It's where you happen to be. But it seems strange that they haven't moved beyond that. And particularly in something as data-driven as banking, you would think it would be really easy to see who was performing well in terms of their client, their volumes of business and so on. So surely where they do it would be one of the least important things. But they are one of the biggest employers in certain parts of the US and in that industry, and they must have figured out that this is what works for them.
Yeah, and I have to say that the articles in the Daily Telegraph and Bloomberg, which are under behind a paywall or at least behind subscription, did mention that actually they had been doing quite well, that last year was quite a good year for the bank. So everyone's a bit baffled. And I think that this is not about whether people should be in the office or not and how many days. This is really about how are these decisions being made? How are they being communicated? Etc. It's really
in a press release, apparently, which is kind of weird in its own right. But
so yes, I think that's the issue. That's really the issue, is that it is very complicated. That different arrangements work differently in different organizations. But the issue is, if we're not focusing on involving our people in some way to make these decisions, we're going to lose them. And something else along these lines, and we can definitely be more brutal with this one, is Silicon Valley Bank, which unfortunately went down not long ago. There was an article in the FT and in other places. A friend of mine actually sent me the FT one. You can share some articles if you're a subscriber. And it really was, in a way, blaming remote work for the failure of the bank. And it's one of those articles that came probably when they didn't have much more to say about what was going on.
No, let's just try and cast around for something whilst the dust was settling time. But it's ridiculous. It's like all the issues about digital nomads driving prices up and things like that. When it's about, there are social shifts and there are economic shifts and there are so many factors, and correlation is not causation, people. These are very complicated times with lots of moving parts. And certainly globally, economically, there is so much going on. And SVB's failure to manage their treasury effectively, I'd love to know how that would have been different if they'd all been sitting in the office next to each other.
This article in particular reminded me of a friend of mine once said to me, he worked in a bank, and he said, can you come and do, when I was doing team building, can you come and do a session with us, because we have an issue in the office. We all sitting down looking at our computers and we never talk. Can you come and do a session with us? And of course, I suggested they go for lunch together. They don't need any team building activities. But it's this thing of we forget. Well, we don't. Like some people are forgetting that we had also cultures of people where were not talking to each other, where there was no transparency, where there was no honesty, where there was no accountability, and the fact that it can happen within four walls as well. So
absolutely. And arguably, there are greater risks in some situations of groupthink and confirmation bias and so on when you are all having those social factors interwoven by looking at each other across a desk as well. Sometimes remote can even give you a little bit more distance on good decision making, I think.
However, the one thing that I think all of these articles are forgetting, I don't know if the Financial Times said anything around this. Maybe it did because it was quoting Nick Bloom. We keep forgetting that remote amplifies everything. Mm-hmm. So if you have a culture where people are being careless, where they're not being accountable to each other, where they're not talking to the people they should be talking to, etc., and you go remote, it becomes worse and more noticeable.
Yeah, so, I don't think that's what's happened here. But I think actually some of the tools we use for remote communication might well have more of an implication here. Just the fact that this kind of the rumors spread so quickly because of digital communication and all the VCs panicking on Twitter and telling everybody to take their money out. We wouldn't have had that if we didn't have that global interconnected world of communicating so fast, I think.
Well, that's another thing, actually, that we forget, that it's not just the world of work that has moved in that way. It's also the world of the world, basically. Yeah. And things do happen faster, and it doesn't matter where your people are based. If something's going on, everyone finds out about it very quickly.
Yep.
You have no more control over that.
Yes. So I'm sure there'll be books written about this collapse that, people will be picking over the reasons. I'd be surprised if remote work's really in the frame for this.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We'll see where it came in, because all of the factors would come in, and I think that for those of us who haven't been affected directly, it is very interesting, all of this. And I just wanted to I'll stick a link in the show notes to point listeners to an article I wrote a long time ago when IBM called everyone back into the office. I don't know if it was even months or a year after Yahoo did the same thing.
Yes, and that's going back a while now.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going back there. So, anyway.
It's always a cycle, I guess. Where are we at in the backlash of remote and ways of working?
You know what, Maya, I think I'll stick some of these links in the show notes for listeners, because if not, we're going to be going on for ages. But there's a couple of more articles that might be interesting. But I did want to just mention that we're not the only ones. And it's not just the people who have a foot in the remote world that are saying this. I was listening to it's now a TED show, After Hours, which is a great podcast. I recommend it. And in the episode of the 5th of April, two of the guests, who were two ladies, one of them was from the HBR, the other, I think, if it's not The Economist, is something like that. They run a podcast called Women at Work. And one of them said, wait until the office leases run out, then we'll see an increase in flexibility.
Yeah, we will. But there's also, I think a lot of people are very concerned. If we thought the Silicon Valley Bank collapsing was a bolt out of the blue, what's going to happen to all the big money in commercial real estate as those leases run out? Because it's not like somebody else is waiting to take that lease on.
Well, funny you should say that, because I think I put it in the comments because I saw it when I was looking up one of these articles in I don't even remember what the website was. Amancio Ortega, if that's his name, the CEO of Zara, Amancio Ortega, yes. It was in the Reuters website. Amancio Ortega has just bought the former BBC office building in London, which is just off Oxford Circus. So there are
they'll get repurposed. Yeah, I hope so.
But certainly there is going to be a lot of change, and and at some point we might even find that organizations who now are making everyone go back into the office have to start thinking about sending some people home because of whatever. So, right, okay, let's move on to the next item. And this, well, we're continuing the complicated arena, but this is a bit more fun. There was a great article on the MIT Sloan Review about basically the complexity of global laws. Let me see what happens if I click on the link, which I think it's work from home regulations are coming and companies aren't ready. What I'll do, I'll summarize it because I'll go through it very quickly because it's actually what it is. It's full of examples. I was able to access the Sloan Review through my local library until the 31st of March, when they have changed apps or something, and now I can't access it anymore. So I'm really sad because it's got great articles. But this one was, it's written by a lady called Jimena Murillo Chavarro, and it's called Work from Home Regulations Are Coming, Companies Aren't Ready. And the big summary, and I do want to share some specifics because it's where it gets interesting. The big summary is basically countries are responding with their law in different ways. So if you want to employ people across the globe, you really have to look into the detail of every single country because it's very nuanced. I'll give you some of the examples. So there's lots of new regulation to protect remote workers under the existing environmental, health and safety legislation and labor laws. So there's already regulation that's actually coming under those umbrellas. And multinationals have to deal with different geographic jurisdictions. So, for example, and the first one is Spain, so please butt in if I get this wrong. Remote work, as remote work, is activity at a worker's home or another place of their choice at least 30% of the time for over 3 months. Teleworking has been named as a subcategory that involves using telecommunications for work. And for that, you need a written agreement with the worker, a detailed schedule, name the place of work, and lay out how the activities are going to be monitored. Is that more or less right for Spain, Maya?
Yeah, I think so. And Spain did this quite early. It seemed that Spain turned around very fast with this Ley de Teletrabajo back in 2021 or something.
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
so, yeah, it might not be perfect.
None of it is.
Like a lot of legislation made in haste, but at least there was an attempt to frame things a bit. Yeah. And yeah, it is for companies who want to work across multiple jurisdictions, they are going to have different rules and different definitions. And even if you are using employers of record and things like that, they're going to have to comply differently on the ground with people's terms and conditions. So yes, quite a minefield.
So Germany has a distinction between mobile work, which is any work outside premises, which uses IT, and telework, which is work exclusively and permanently done at the employee's home. And also it looks like they're thinking of monitoring the hours, so making that a legal requirement so that people don't overwork. And of course, there's the whole work accident insurance thing, whether that's happening at home.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because just within Europe, there's two such different ways of looking at this already, just with 2 countries.
So we can move to another continent. So Colombia has 3 distinct regulations for teleworking, working from home, and remote work. Peru has a new law on teleworking. Philippines is revising its Telecommuting Act, and it's going to have specific requirements for the IT sector. Then the US Telework Enhancement Act 2010 is still operating, but there are some local laws around interstate taxation and expense reimbursement. And then, so that's like the whole like law around teleworking specifically or remote work. But then you have other kind of laws like the right to disconnect, which we've talked about before. So in France, companies of more than 50 employees need an agreement with workers to regulate the use of digital devices.
You daren't send an email in France after about 6 o'clock at night.
The computer explodes.
Yeah. The guillotine comes out.
So it looks like Spain and Italy have something similar, and then there might be an EU-wide directive coming.
Interesting.
Where you will need to monitor and measure employee working hours and compensate if people work outside hours.
Wow. So I mean, once it gets to EU level, at least that shows some attempt to standardize all these experiments that are still going on. We've even got an experiment in Valencia going on this month with the 4-day week at the city council level, but it's a bit of a fudge because there are 3 bank holidays of Mondays over that period. So only one of them is an extra day.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, the 4-day week is another interesting experiment as well.
So it's all got to feed into this idea of trying to pin it down at an EU level.
Wasn't it Spain that actually was looking at legislation for the 4-day week?
There was definitely something about that last year.
A few weeks ago, I heard something, but it might not have been Spain. So sorry, listeners. Let us know. Pilar,
we can't keep up with this.
We can't. It's worse than the GPT-3 stuff. So listeners, Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. Let us know if if I'm making any mistakes on this, and also if you've heard something around in some countries, some legislation coming around the 4-day week, or virtualnotdistant.com for the contact form. I'm going to stick all my notes or my summary in the show notes, but I just want to start wrapping up this article with 3 lawsuits, because I think this is where it gets interesting and shows the complexity. So in California in 2021, a company was fined for not reimbursing customer service employees when they were working from home. This is quite a big thing. They really tried to get the company to pay for that. It's 2021, so still in pandemic. In Holland, an employee, get ready, listeners, hang on to your seats. An employee was wrongfully fired for refusing to keep their webcam on for several hours a day.
Oh.
And then in Germany, someone slipped from the bed to the home office and it qualified as a workplace accident. So no wonder.
Oh boy, yeah.
No wonder that, I mean, if I ran a business, there's no way I would hire globally. I am putting my hand up.
I think we're all in the wrong business. We need to be lawyers. Because they're the only ones who are going to win from all of this.
Talking of which, do you want to just point listeners to a website where they might get some help around this or some info?
Yeah, I dropped in the link to the Work From Anywhere team because they're doing a lot of work to help employers make the right decisions about where they can hire people because of this continually emerging minefield of different regulations in different countries. There are huge things to think about if you want to be an employer that offers the benefits of being able to work from anywhere or work flexibly. A lot of the compliance risk is on the employer. Yeah, the Work From Anywhere team are trying to build an algorithm that basically will tell you you've got a person who wants to be hired by a company in one country and they want to live in another country. These are the things you have to look at and take into account, or why you might not even be able to hire them, or there might not be an EOR there, or it might be safer to have them as a contractor or whatever. So, and I don't know how they keep up with the way things are changing so fast, but I do know a lot of people are probably going to need external help with this kind of decision in the future.
Well, thank you for that. And it's still in the traveling around the world. So actually, now that we're saying this, Maya, I don't know how this next example is going to work out with everything we've said, but you've given us a link to follow for the full article. I will just share with listeners a note. Through my library, I've discovered that I can access the library online and all these magazines. There's a magazine called This Week, which is a summary of the main news in the world and the UK about all sorts of stuff. And I saw this snippet, which I'm just going to read straight out. A cruise line is aiming to attract digital nomads with a 135-country round-the-world trip that takes 3 years to complete for £73,060. Passengers will get full board accommodation on a ship that has been remodeled with remote workers in mind. As well as the usual cruise features, it will have offices, meeting rooms, and full Wi-Fi. Life at Sea Cruises says demand has been unprecedented, with the newly retired also proving particularly keen. What do you think, Maya?
Whoa, sign me up. I've passed the life milestone this week of no longer having children under 18. So I'm going to sail off into the sunset in my new third age and bring it on. I mean, it does sound incredible, doesn't it? I've seen different pricing because there's obviously different cabins and different arrangements, but none of the pricing at the amounts advertised, really, you compare that to renting in any city for 3 years, it's nothing at all. And then you have to add in the fact that you could probably be not tax resident anywhere for the duration of. So I think this is going to be an extremely attractive option. And as such, it's going to look like a massive loophole tax-wise. So I don't know quite what's going to happen about that. But amazing. I mean, I've never been on a cruise. I've never sort of been attracted to it as a holiday. No. But there's something about this. I don't know. What if you hated all the people?
Yes.
Or your immediate neighbours, or you hated the food, or
you could think of it like a big co-working space. So hopefully, you might not get on with some people, but there'll always be some people. I mean, there's no way I would do something like this.
But you wouldn't sign up for 3 years in a co-working, but you weren't allowed to leave.
No, that's true. That's true. I think this would be great for someone like Shannon Teague. She appeared in episode 319 at the beginning of the year on lessons learned from scaling a remote business. And she loves traveling, and she actually set up a remote business so that to attract people who like traveling, so maybe they can all travel together in this. Yeah, excellent.
It's very interesting. It seems very fixed. I could imagine this working better as something people can kind of opt in to different legs or different bits of.
Yes.
But I guess they want a proof of concept that, I don't know, 3 years just seems such a big chunk of your life to know where you're going to be on a boat for. I don't know. It's difficult for me to book a meeting in 3 weeks.
Yes. Wow. So hopefully we'll see more of these kind of things. As we can expect more of the first item that we covered, but hopefully also just some creative and different ways of looking at what does remote work mean. So talking of traveling, actually, let's move into talking about the couple of conferences. Why don't I give us a breather and just give the listeners a little bit of change in voice. I'm going to be running a session on the 1st of June in Brussels in person. And the session is called Let's Make Remote Work Embracing the Principles of Asynchronous Communication. So very basic, just looking at what are the principles? So regardless of your culture, how you're going to implement it, what tools you have, this is the basis. And very interestingly, Isabelle de Klerk is actually also doing redefining the future of collaboration, balancing synchronous and asynchronous work. So it's like it's quite a little theme that's going on. Well, rather than just talk about this wonderful conference, I thought we'd bring the organizers in. So I'm happy to introduce to you Guy van Leemput and Patrick van Renterghem. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
The 6th, because this is the 6th edition of the Brussels Digital Workplace Conference. A good place to start is for you to tell us how this conference came about. Listeners, if you're listening and have access to the web, the URL is dwbrussels.com, and it's happening on Thursday, the 1st of June, 2023 in Brussels. Of course, all the details are in the URL, and we'll repeat them later. But let's look at the conference history. I would love to know, why did you set up this conference? Who wants to go? Guy?
Yeah, maybe I'll start because I was the original initiative came from me in 2018. So it's indeed now the 6th year running of this conference. It started off as a kind of a traditional conference focusing on intranets and focusing on the usage of classical intranet platforms by internal communication people. And then it kind of evolved from there. At some point in time, I think it was as of late 2019 or 2020, Patrick joined as a co-organizer. And then we started expanding a bit in terms of the scope and the audience of the conference. So maybe, Patrick, you can expand on that.
Yeah, of course. I've been an organizer for more than 30 years. So I did lots of seminars, but mainly in the IT sector. I mean, my company is called IT Works. So I came in with more the technology hat on. And of course, COVID also came around in 2020. And that was actually a good thing, I think, for the digital workplace because it moved a lot of borders in terms of technology. and made us use this technology, which was a bit immature maybe in 2019, but really in 2020 it had to catch up. Of course, those conferences in 2020, 2021 were online.
Mhm.
Also was a bit of a change for us as organizers also, but we learned a lot. Everybody learned a lot. We shared a lot of experiences and knowledge and best practices. And I think in 2021, we had a very good conference. And then 2022, we did it's physical again because it's so much nicer. I mean, there's speakers back on the podium. That's great. Participants back around the coffee room, coffee machines and the lunch tables and so on, and chatting. And of course, also the sponsoring partners were also more happy to see the people and to actually be able to talk to them. So what we have in our idea in 2023 is going to be a physical first. We hope to get people in, but of course we'll allow remote participants to also be participating in the event as much as possible. I mean, they'll see and they'll hear the speakers and in the plenary room at least, and also interact with them via the chat. So that's going to be interesting for them as well.
Thank you. So lots going on and lots of changes for you both. So congratulations to still keep it going and adapting in the times. So I imagine, I mean, you said 2018, that to me feels like a century ago, tech-wise, and with our relationship with technology. So maybe we can go back to Guy with everything that's going on in the world of digital experience, etc. How did you decide what to focus on this year and what kind of speakers to bring in and sessions to have?
Yeah, it's indeed a tough choice because, like you say, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of new tools, new technology, but there's also evolving tools. So I think what we're trying to do for this edition is kind of a mix of, on the one hand, evolution, and on the other hand, revolution or revolution. With the evolution, I mean, yes, there are tools, intranet tools, for instance, that get better. There are platforms like Microsoft 365 that we all know, and also Google and other suppliers have similar advances, similar improvements, and of course also hybrid working is still constantly under evolution, remote working, and all of that has an impact on the way we use those tools. So that's the evolution part. Nothing really shocking or nothing really revolutionary there. But on the other hand, we do see revolutionary advances. And I think we've all learned, of course, about AI and about ChatGPT. I think that's one area where everybody is curious to find out more at the conference, how AI and how these kind of tools can change the lives and the jobs of people in internal communication, in HR, in IT as well. So it's a combination of those two, the business as usual, let's say, the evolution, and then the brand new things, the revolution.
It is also always a mix of practical case studies and user experiences that are being presented of companies, small and large companies, government, non-government, who have to go through a transition from not having a really good digital workplace to having a good digital workplace, and the change process is important, and also the HR aspect is important. The collaboration is very important, and we try to have these sorts of presentations, as well as presentations which are going more into the trend atmosphere and looking at what the changes are in the digital workplace. And also we'll also always try to give a glimpse of the future.
And I was thinking that the people attending must have, well, has the crowd been different? Because I imagine like in 2018, you had people who were really into this kind of stuff. That's why they were there. But actually now pretty much anyone who is in some kind of HR leadership position. Is that the case?
Yes, I think it has evolved, the crowd. Traditional internal comms managers were the main target audience in 2018, intranet managers and those kind of audiences. And I think the audience now of the conference has broadened, and also the scope and the impact of technology in various areas like HR, which is very much a people-oriented discipline, of course, which maybe in the past has has not always embraced new technology with the same speed as other areas. I think they are now indeed embarking also on a lot of technology-driven change processes. They're implementing new employee experience platforms. They're looking at HR technology platforms and implementing those for all kinds of things, from onboarding to other aspects of an employee's career. So I think there is a lot of that which is now happening, and the conference really tries to focus on that as well.
Who do you think are the kind of professionals that will get most out of this conference? You've mentioned HR because of the breadth. There's still people, internal communications, I imagine, as well.
Technology people, at least the people who have to build that fundamental infrastructure for doing the collaborative work, the meetings, the etc. So that these are also important, of course, definitely from my point of view. So we have multiple tracks at the conference and try to address all these different target groups, target audiences, and try to please them and make them happy with the content that we provide.
Yeah, we see that as a little bit of a triangle in a way, because IT, HR, and internal comms, they are really the three most important stakeholders in any digital workplace or any hybrid workplace project. And so I think they are approaching each other more and more, or there's more and more interaction between those. And at the conference, we really try to facilitate that by offering a program that allows different silos maybe in the past to come together and learn from each other, get inspired from what they see at the event.
Yeah. That's such an important part, that traditionally maybe they were silos. And of course, we've never wanted silos. But now if we're talking about working in the digital workplace, everyone has to work together because it's part of everyone's job. I would add also, hearing you say about those three things, that any small business owner or anyone who's really looking at their career in management and leadership as well needs to be thinking about that, because you have to think not just about the separate areas as separate buckets, but also how do we integrate them. So I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk of the program. Can you tell us one or two sessions that you wanted to highlight?
Well, there's many different sessions, of course. We have the classical opening and closing keynotes, which we believe are very strong. Opening keynote with a case from Rabobank from the Netherlands on how they implemented hybrid working. And the closing keynote is by somebody who calls himself a digital nomad for the past 10, 15 years, Koen Blankaert. So I'm looking forward to that as well. But I think what we're focusing also especially on in the conference is everything to do with employee experience and the impact that digital tools have on their well-being, causing in some cases, in some organizations, a lot of stress, digital friction. And I think that's really relevant also for HR people. So for instance, I'm looking forward to Hans de Meijer, who will be speaking. He calls himself a supplier of optimism and inspiration, which I kind of like as a title. And he'll be talking exactly about that: digital stress, digital friction, how to deal with it in an organization, and how HR obviously needs to play a big role in that as well. So there is a session by Ivan Westerhoff, who is the CEO of Campfire AI. That's a relatively small and new Belgian, Brussels-based company, actually, who are very active in the world of AI, especially conversational AI, so chatbots and technology like that. They'll be presenting a very interesting case study, very relevant for HR as well. So chatbots helping employees resolving problems. And he'll be talking also more generically on the promise of AI, generative AI. So will talk about ChatGPT for sure. You can't organize a conference these days and not talk about ChatGPT, right? So we had to have it on the program.
Mm-hmm. And you might well need to add something else last minute at the speed we're going.
Indeed, who knows?
Good. So dwbrussels.com listeners, check out the website have a look at the program, the speakers. Thursday, 1st of June 2023 from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. So the full day at Sparks, which is an innovative conference center in the heart of Brussels. Patrick, Guy, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person on the 1st of June.
So are we. Thank you, Pilar, for having us on your podcast.
Thank you, Pilar.
And I have to say thank you to Bart, who is one of our listeners that have been listening for ages, for introducing me to Patrick and Guy. So thank you, Bart. I think we might hear later a little bit more from Patrick and Guy when we move on to tech, because they had some interesting stuff to say as well. But Maya, you are going to be in another country also with another conference. So tell us about that.
Yes, and in just a very few short days, actually, because I don't feel very prepared for it. I'm off to Lisbon for Running Remote, which I'm really looking forward to. It's having been working remotely for so long. This is one of those events that you look at and just think, wow, how much has changed, how this space has come of age, that there's this huge global conference and all these brands coming together, and some really interesting speakers. And it's one of those sort of everyone who's everyone. You look at it and think, oh, I really should be there. And then you think, well, actually, it's only an hour and a half away.
That's true.
Do you know what? Yeah. Still trying to get used to the idea of face-to-face events again in the same way. But some of them, it really is worth being at. So I'm very much looking forward to Running Remote in Lisbon next week.
And what's really amazing is that if you look at the program, there's a lot of what I'd consider mainstream organizations. They're big. They're just that they've really like Atlassian, and I think Microsoft is there. All these organizations. So it's really nice to have such a mix of what I'd call the indie remote advocates and the people in very established organizations together. I think can be very powerful.
Yeah, that sort of enterprise level remote is going to be interesting to see that on stage, and just sort of how they present it. As you say, it's just normal now, right?
Yeah. Good. So let's move on to our last but one item, which is an article. Again, as I said at the beginning, it's an article by Dion Hinchcliffe, who's a digital employee experience professional, and he's been around for ages. I've been following him for a very long time, and he's got lots of interesting things to say. And this is a very long blog post, like you said, but it is about how leading digital workplace vendors are enabling hybrid work. And he makes the point, doesn't he, that the online tools need to evolve for the hybrid experience. We can't just, the same as we just couldn't adopt on office practices into our online work, we can't just adopt remote tools into the hybrid experience, because it needs something different.
Yeah, and it needs to be so good you almost don't notice it. This idea of smoothing away the difference between the people on site and not. That things like Microsoft's AI enhanced video presence or something, it's not something you'd think about, but you just hopefully simply notice, or even not notice, that your remote colleagues are actually more vivid and present and more equal to the people in the same room as you. It's just really interesting to see the amount of tech, the amount of money, the amount of focus there is on trying to solve these problems about presence and ambient communication and making onboarding really work. I think he's really optimistic, actually, because I know that we're quite down on hybrid a lot of the time. Oh, it's just too difficult and it's too complicated and it'll never work. It will never be equal. But actually, there's an awful lot going into trying to solve these problems and make it work. So hopefully that's really encouraging.
I hadn't thought of that, actually, because I'm not the biggest fan of hybrid, because it usually means that hybrid meetings. But I mean, one thing that struck me was that a lot of these tools for the hybrid experience are meeting orientated. So it's obviously that it looks like the biggest problem for the hybrid setup are the meetings. And actually, thinking about that and thinking about what we were talking about earlier, if you start to really solve that so that the hybrid meeting is okay, then you might not need to be making people to come into the office for anything.
Are you listening, Jamie Dimon?
Yes. But then people can actually go to the office when it makes sense for what they're doing.
Yes.
And not because. So I think what you're saying, makes a lot of sense about that. Something very interesting. He mentions a social intranet designed around Google Workspace. And it just reminded me that Google, about 2 years ago, opened, I can't even remember what it was called, whether it was Connect or something like this, which was like a Yammer. It was a kind of a social network thing. And I haven't heard anything so I don't know what's happened with that.
No, a lot of Google stuff just comes and goes, doesn't it? It's kind of, will it be disappearing on us?
It was one of the things that was missing in the suite, though. It was like a place where people could gather. Listeners, again, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. If you have used anything new within, especially the Google ecosystem.
Yes, this Happio. Is that how you say it?
Yes, Happio is the social intranet.
So I've never used that at all. But there are lots of others he picks up on here that I'm thinking like, just double click on all this stuff. Igloo software is a new one on me.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I think what was interesting about the article as well is that he says, my research currently shows that organizations are seeking to put a growing amount of effort into designing their core worker experience upfront in order to reduce onboarding time, effort, and cost, make new workers more effective on the job earlier, reduce complexity and friction in the most common important processes, make existing and new work processes more effective, and create more personalized and purposeful workspaces. I love that it's so specific, and I hope that the research shows that people are being so specific and knowing what problem they're solving. They're not solving the hybrid problem, they're solving onboarding.
Yes. And none of this is actually unique to hybrid. You could read all of those bullets just as clearly in a remote first workspace, and probably even in co-located. You've still got to fix this stuff. Exactly. And it solves for both sides as well. They're talking about making an onboarding a better experience, but then it is actually, if somebody can be productive more quickly, then that's better for the employer as well. And these are just workplace problems.
And it goes to show that it's not enough to say we're doing hybrid, but actually we've got to say we're doing work differently.
Yes.
And very interestingly, I think it was Laila at Mural. She now has a new job at Mural called something like Head of New Ways of Working or something like that. Excuse me if I got it wrong. And it's really interesting that there needs to be that recognition that this is not about remote anymore or hybrid. This is about all these things. We have to think about them differently. Also because the mindset has changed so much.
Yes. And when you talk about something like Head of New Ways of Working, it's got that intrinsic acknowledgement that we don't know what they are yet or what they are going to be next year. And what it is about embracing that transition all the time, and not with this kind of idea that it will be done at any point. We'll just draw a line on and say we don't need to do anything new anymore. We are in just such a fast-moving world now, from everything from the tech to the compliance to the regulation. It's all going to keep shifting, and that's the new reality that people have to take on.
Which leads me by the way, can you hear, listeners, the nice birds behind Maya? I think it's lovely, and let's pay attention, unless they get got rid of during post-production. Hopefully not, because it is quite nice, actually.
Well, we can always blend them back in again on another track.
So your point, actually, Maya, brings us back very nicely to Patrick and Guy, who also had some stuff to say during our conversation about some of the stuff they're seeing coming. So let's hear from them.
Coming from my background as tools expert, I'm also looking at that revolutionary part of digital tools, the arising of AI. Generative AI in particular, ChatGPT, to give the most prominent example, I think, of that. But it's really a superstorm that's happening with automation. I mean, Microsoft's Power Platform is really being adapted and used at the moment. There's other tools as well in that area, and there's the low-code revolution, which is also important. We have a shortage of knowledge workers. And that these things can solve a part of that problem, of course. I think Satya Nadella said it lowers the barrier to knowledge, to have people who have less knowledge also do work for which today experts and consultants are being used, put that more in their own hands. I think Isabelle de Klerk, who's also a famous speaker at the conference, mentioned it as a EPO for the knowledge worker. EPO is, of course, the performance-enhancing drug that everybody knows, particularly sportsmen and sportswomen know that drug. And we see that happening as well. And actually, we ain't seen nothing yet, I think. ChatGPT was just the beginning, end of last year. There's things like plugins, which allow third-party vendors to actually embed that GPT capability into their products. And we see a lot of things happening there. I'm also looking at Microsoft Loop. I mean, that's something that some consultants, even Microsoft partners, don't even know that it exists, but it's actually Notion. It looks like Notion. It smells like Notion. It works like Notion. And Notion is incredibly popular in the collaboration space. So if Microsoft really, really releases Loop, which they're going to do this year, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of collaboration, because that's still the missing puzzle piece, I think, in digital workplaces.
Patrick, you were saying you've got your trend watcher and you're looking out for what's next. So you've already told us about some of the generative AI things. What other things are you looking forward to in the space?
I'm also a Zoom user, which means that I'm not in that Microsoft ecosystem, but I see Zoom acquiring companies that make it a bit more general purpose collaboration and working together tool, not just meetings and conferences, but also for sharing documents and so on. Having a bit more of an intranet in Zoom would be a good addition, and that's being solved by their acquisition of WorkVivo, which, by the way, Guy had also looked at for the as an intranet expert in internal communication.
Yeah, it's one of the many products that I follow. So it's interesting to see how all these vendors like Zoom, but also Microsoft and Google, of course, and others, they're really advancing their tools. It's again that evolution that I talked, but it goes at such a neck-breaking speed. This evolution that maybe you could also call it a revolution, and that's really, I think that's the trend. More and more of these tools coming out, and it makes it difficult for people in HR, in internal comms to keep up with that speed. So that's one of the challenges I'm sure that the industry is facing.
We'll also see big changes in the search atmosphere, because Bing AI is fantastic because it has the GPT behind it. And then Google has, of course, to adapt its way of working over its search solution. And they've started up the Project Maggie, which will help them to incorporate more AI, which will be BART or whatever, or language model that they use into the very popular Google search engine that they have at the moment. So that's also interesting to follow. Probably not at this conference, but maybe for next year.
And I do hope we can bring them back. I was talking to them, Maya, afterwards about doing an episode together. Not now, because I have so many guest interviews in my computer. And I think it was Patrick who said, yeah, but you can't then keep the conversation in your computer for very long because this is moving so fast.
Yes, this stuff dates very quickly, doesn't it?
So hopefully in October or sometime we can have them back. Anything else around this last article, Maya, or just the general tech?
No, I mean, there's lots of things that I want to double click on here and just follow up and keep an eye on. But I suppose the only other thing is we're not going to talk about AI again, but it's interesting that Microsoft is so dominant here. And there's things like the Copilot for Teams and things, which is starting to come into all of their apps, and they've got this AI enhanced video presence. So I think a lot of the solutions are going to be automating away things which currently create friction, and that'll be one area to keep an eye on.
So let's wrap up with some words from one of our listeners, because this is so exciting. So our dear listener, Scarlett, she got in touch last year in 2022 with some questions. It inspired a whole episode with Tyler Selhorn about the head of remote role. So Tyler and I talked about that, and then Scarlett got back in touch to say, and she's given me, of course, permission to read this verbatim. She said, "Thank you so much for this. It was a fantastic episode and I learned a lot. Here are a few of my key takeaways. The work needs to be done no matter what we call it. Love this and totally agree. Essentially, what this says to me is how much the role of HR ops has changed since the increase in remote work. This also depends on how the organization wants to be seen and could depend on the size of the organization. It's part of every people leader's role. What this says to me is how HR teams need to adapt their people leadership frameworks, including the ever-evolving async processes. This also shows the change of skill set we are looking for in people leaders. Document-centered rather than meeting-centered. This is a great way to summarize the vision. This would be a great company value, and I might propose this at my company. I could talk about this for hours. So could we, Scarlett?
Yes, woman after our own hearts here, clearly.
Yes, that's why she listens. Thank you once more for responding to me and keeping me updated throughout. I feel connected. I'll be listening. Scarlett, this is just like, for me, this is like a podcaster's dream, isn't it?
Yes, this is why we do it. And yeah, it's lovely to have that. Somebody asked a question, you answered it through a whole episode, and then circling back for that closure and feedback. It's perfect. This is what we love about podcasting.
And then they give us the summary so we can show the rest. Then we don't even have to do it. Put it in the show notes.
Awesome.
Excellent. Sorry, Maya, I spoke right over you there.
No, that's fine. Just so that, this is one of those podcaster moments, isn't it? That you think, yeah, this is why we do it. It is sometimes about solving something that one person expresses. And you obviously, with due respect to Scarlett, we hope it's useful and interesting for other listeners as well, but I'm sure it is. And it's just lovely when you get feedback like this.
So thank you, Scarlett, so much for, first of all, taking the time, because I have to say I listen to a lot of podcasts and never get in touch with them. So I know that this is actually something that takes a lot of effort. So it's very, very much appreciated, and to all the listeners who do that as well. But also, of course, listeners, if there's anything you want to ask us, then let us know. Maybe we are not able to, but maybe we can, and we can bring someone else in, and it's always so fantastic. So Maya, before I rattle off all the contact details, anything else you want to say as we wrap up this very long episode?
No, I think we've probably said enough, and looking forward to coming back after some of these events that we're both going to be at in the next few weeks and catching up on that soon.
So thank you to Ross, who's going to have a great time putting this episode together with 4 voices. Listeners, you can subscribe to this show, the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, in whatever podcast app you use. You can also sign up to our monthly newsletter, which has reading and listening recommendations. And you can do that over at Virtual Not Distant. Let me say the name of the company again that I don't know very much. virtualnotdistant.com. If you want to follow us on LinkedIn, we're not doing very much at the moment, and you can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode, and thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.